The alien commander's ship landed smoothly on the grounds of the human military academy. The gleaming metal of the vessel was a sharp contrast to the rugged landscape of Earth. The commander, a veteran of countless interstellar conflicts, descended the ramp and looked around. This was the first time their species had been invited to observe the humans up close. From the beginning, there was something off about the place. The human officers stood in perfect formation, their faces hardened, eyes forward, barely acknowledging the alien presence. The commander had heard much about humanity, a relatively new species to the interstellar stage, known for their stubbornness and resilience. They had a reputation for outlasting their enemies, even when facing overwhelming odds. Today, the commander would witness firsthand how they forged such beings. The academy itself was an imposing sight, vast, with architecture that blended practical utility and an almost brutal elegance. Towering structures lined the compound, surrounded by open fields where soldiers drilled. There was an undeniable energy in the air, a constant hum of activity. Every human seemed to be in motion, preparing, moving with purpose. As the commander was led through the entrance by a stoic human general, they couldn't help but notice the statues dotting the grounds. Cold, emotionless faces carved in stone, depicting warriors of old. The commander could only assume these were the humans' way of honoring their past. There were plaques with quotes beneath the statues, words like, "Victory or death," and "No retreat." It was an odd way to celebrate violence, the alien thought. The humans spoke little as they moved deeper into the compound. Their military uniforms were pressed, their weapons always within reach. It was clear these people took their war-making seriously. The commander could feel an unease creeping in. Something about this place was unsettling, though they couldn't quite place it yet. The first glimpse of what lay beneath the surface came during a simple walk across the academy grounds. The commander noticed how the soldiers trained with an intensity that seemed unnatural, almost obsessive. Groups of recruits ran drills in a methodical, almost mechanical fashion, their bodies pushed beyond limits that would have broken members of the commander's species. Sweat poured down their faces, but they never stopped, never slowed. The humans didn't seem to have a sense of moderation. They pushed themselves as though they had no concept of failure, no fear of injury. The commander watched in silence as one of the recruits collapsed, his body giving out from exhaustion. Two others quickly hauled him to his feet and continued running, dragging the barely conscious man along. There was no sympathy, no rest. Only the mission, the goal of completing the task. "Is this how they train all their warriors?" the commander thought, bewildered. The alien general had been told that humans were resourceful and adaptive, but this was something else. Their tour continued, and soon they reached the main building where the higher-ranking officers resided. The general accompanying the aliens stopped outside a large door, gesturing for the commander to enter. Inside was a massive hall, where hundreds of young recruits were gathered, standing in rows, perfectly still. At the front of the room, a human instructor shouted orders, their voice booming and harsh. The commander observed how the recruits reacted, not flinching or showing any hesitation. Their discipline was astounding, but there was something disturbing about it too. It was as though these humans had trained themselves to shut off their emotions entirely. The instructor demonstrated a combat maneuver, effortlessly subduing a trainee with swift, brutal efficiency. The commander couldn't help but feel a chill as they watched the recruits practice the same techniques. Every move was precise, designed not just to defeat but to incapacitate an enemy in the quickest, most ruthless way possible. The alien commander had seen combat in many forms across the galaxy, but the humans took it to another level. There was an edge to their training that suggested something darker. They weren't just preparing for battle, they were preparing to dominate, to destroy their enemies without mercy. The longer the commander watched, the clearer it became that there was something fundamentally different about humans. They didn't fight for survival, at least not in the way most species did. They fought because, deep down, they believed it was necessary, that it was in their nature. As they left the hall, the alien commander could feel their unease growing. There was something about these humans that felt dangerous, something beyond their physical abilities or tactical knowledge. It was in the way they carried themselves, the way they seemed to accept violence as a part of who they were. The human general turned to the alien and gave a slight nod, acknowledging the tension in the air. "You've only seen the beginning," the general said quietly, his tone flat. "There's much more to come." The alien commander said nothing, but their mind was racing. What exactly had they gotten themselves into? The alien commander was led to the expansive training grounds, where the heart of human military preparation unfolded. The atmosphere was charged with a raw intensity, as soldiers moved in synchronized precision. It was unlike anything the alien had witnessed on other worlds. In the distance, groups of recruits were engaged in grueling physical exercises, pushing their bodies far beyond what seemed sustainable. The alien commander had expected a display of strength, but what they saw was almost excessive. Humans, drenched in sweat, ran obstacle courses filled with towering walls, barbed wire, and mud pits. Every muscle strained, every breath labored. There was no rest. One wrong step, and recruits would fall, but immediately, they would rise again, as if failure wasn't an option. It was a silent rule, understood by all, that stopping was not permitted. The humans were conditioned to endure, to embrace pain. The alien commander's species had sophisticated training methods too, but they were balanced, designed to optimize without breaking the body. Here, it was different. These humans seemed to thrive on pushing beyond normal thresholds, embracing the suffering as if it were a necessary right. As they moved deeper into the grounds, the aliens saw soldiers participating in hand-to-hand combat drills. The sounds of fists striking flesh echoed across the field. These weren't just sparring matches, they were brutal, vicious encounters. Each combatant fought with a fierceness that seemed disproportionate for mere training. Blood was spilled, noses broken, and yet no one stopped. There was an underlying ferocity, a primal edge, that unnerved the commander. The alien could see it in their eyes, the focus, the determination. These humans weren't just preparing for a theoretical enemy. They were mentally engaged, as if they were already in the middle of a battle. The blows were real, the consequences harsh, yet none of them hesitated. It wasn't merely about physical prowess. It was a mindset, one where retreat or weakness simply didn't exist. Nearby, a senior officer shouted commands walking among the recruits, ensuring their adherence to the drill. The alien noticed how none of the soldiers looked to him for comfort or encouragement. They didn't need it. Their training wasn't about external validation. It was about something internal, a drive the alien couldn't quite comprehend. These humans were harder than expected, more resilient, more willing to embrace the raw brutality of combat. Moving on, the alien commander was shown the advanced combat simulation arena. Inside, recruits were strapped into virtual reality units, their bodies twitching and jerking as they fought enemies in digital landscapes. The alien had heard of humanity's technological innovations, but witnessing these simulations was something else. The realism was uncanny. Soldiers moved through scenarios as if they were in real-life battle zones, fighting alien forces, other human factions, and even environmental disasters. It wasn't just the level of sophistication that disturbed the commander, it was the content. Every scenario was designed for maximum stress, overwhelming odds, multiple threats, and inevitable losses. The human soldiers weren't training to avoid death, they were training to continue fighting despite it. In one simulation, a soldier was hit, his simulated leg destroyed. Yet, instead of quitting or restarting, he dragged himself across the field, continuing to engage the enemy. It was relentless, and it was terrifying. For a moment, the commander's own instinctive fear kicked in. This was beyond readiness. It was indoctrination into a philosophy of war that saw no end. Humans didn't view war as a disruption to peace. To them, it seemed that conflict was the status quo, and they trained for it as though it were an inevitability rather than a possibility. The commander began to realize that humans didn't merely survive war, they had evolved to thrive in it. The alien observed another simulation, where soldiers fought in space, against foes that bore a striking resemblance to the commander's species. The simulation was brutal, unrelenting, and shockingly realistic. The humans won, of course. They always seemed to in their simulations, but it wasn't the victory that left the commander speechless. It was how they won. There was no mercy, no hesitation. The humans annihilated their enemy without a second thought, calculating every move with cold precision. It wasn't personal. It was simply the way things were done. As the simulation ended, the soldiers removed their helmets, faces slick with sweat, breathing heavily but otherwise unfazed. They showed no signs of emotional strain. They were used to this. What struck the commander most was how normal this all seemed to the humans. They weren't disturbed by the carnage, the simulated deaths of their comrades or enemies. They were conditioned, through repeated exposure, to see these outcomes as routine. The alien general guiding the tour spoke briefly about the importance of psychological conditioning. Humans, it seemed, were trained not just physically but mentally, to cope with the harshest realities of combat. They were made to face their fears daily, to confront death, loss, and suffering until none of it mattered anymore. It was this detachment, this almost casual acceptance of violence, that unnerved the alien. Leaving the simulation chamber, the commander could feel a growing sense of discomfort. The humans were not the naive, fragile species they had initially seemed. There was something darker, something more ruthless in the way they prepared for war. Their willingness to go to extremes, to push past pain and suffering, spoke of a species that had endured more than most. As they passed another group of recruits, the commander couldn't help but notice how young they were. These soldiers were barely out of their adolescence, yet they carried themselves with the weight of veterans. They had been molded into warriors, and the commander realized that this process likely began long before they ever stepped foot in the academy. Humans didn't just train soldiers, they forged them from a young age, preparing them mentally and physically for the inevitable conflict ahead. The commander's unease deepened. This was not what they had expected. The humans weren't just a resilient species. They were relentless, unyielding, and perhaps far more dangerous than anyone had ever realized. The tour continued, but the commander's mind was already racing, trying to comprehend the full implications of what they had just witnessed. The humans, it seemed, were preparing for something far greater than just defense. They were preparing for survival at all costs. The alien commander was led into the weapons testing facility, a sprawling complex that hummed with energy. The tension in the air was palpable as engineers and soldiers moved with precision, preparing for the next demonstration. What the commander saw was far beyond anything they had expected from a species as young as humanity. It wasn't just the sophistication of the technology. It was the sheer lethal intent behind every device. The first demonstration began with a simple firearm, or so it seemed. The human officer explained that it was a standard-issue rifle, but the modifications made it capable of adapting to various battlefield conditions. The commander observed as the weapon effortlessly shifted between modes, energy-based, projectile, and even one that fired concentrated plasma rounds. Each shot was precise, deadly, and efficient. The commander could see the brutal logic behind the design, simplicity combined with overwhelming firepower. But what truly caught the alien off guard was the way the humans tested their weapons. They didn't merely aim at static targets. Instead, the testing grounds simulated actual battle conditions, with moving targets that replicated real threats. The humans weren't just preparing to fight, they were preparing to dominate in any environment, against any enemy. The targets included drones mimicking the movement patterns of alien species, including the commander's own. This was a clear indication that humans had studied potential opponents deeply, understanding their weaknesses and exploiting them with ruthless efficiency. The commander felt a growing discomfort as they watched the next phase of testing. The humans brought out a device designed to incapacitate entire squads of enemies at once. It was a small, unassuming object, but when activated, it released a pulse that scrambled neural connections. Any living being caught within its radius would be rendered immobile, their nervous system temporarily shut down. The implications were chilling. This was a weapon designed not to kill, but to completely neutralize a foe, stripping them of their autonomy without even firing a shot. The alien could feel a knot tightening in their stomach. This wasn't just warfare as they knew it, this was something far more strategic, more calculated. The humans had developed weapons that could cripple an opponent before the real fight even began. It wasn't just about winning, it was about ensuring there was no contest to begin with. There was a cold, calculated logic to everything the commander was witnessing. The humans had taken every possible angle into consideration, preparing for any scenario with a precision that bordered on obsession. As the testing continued, the commander was introduced to the concept of psychological warfare. One demonstration involved a device that emitted frequencies designed to disrupt an enemy's mental state. It could induce panic, fear, or even hallucinations, depending on the settings. This was warfare at a level the alien hadn't anticipated. Humans weren't just focusing on physical destruction, they were weaponizing the mind, turning an enemy's own thoughts against them. The commander had always believed that war was fought with weapons and soldiers. But here, they were seeing an entirely new dimension, one where the very fabric of reality could be manipulated to break an opponent's spirit. The human officers explained the strategic importance of such tools. War, to them, wasn't just about who had the better technology or the larger numbers. It was about breaking the enemy at every level, physically, mentally, and emotionally. The humans had learned through centuries of conflict that victory wasn't just about killing your opponent. It was about ensuring they never had the will to fight again. The alien commander couldn't help but feel a rising sense of dread. Humanity wasn't just preparing for war, they were preparing to end wars before they even started, by any means necessary. The next weapon brought out for demonstration was a large, ominous-looking drone. Its sleek, black surface absorbed light, making it almost invisible in certain environments. It moved with unnerving silence, hovering effortlessly in the air. The officer explained that this was one of their most advanced unmanned combat units, capable of operating independently in hostile environments. The drone was equipped with an array of weapons, lasers, missiles, and energy disruptors, designed to engage multiple targets simultaneously. What made the drone truly terrifying was its AI. The humans had programmed it to learn from its encounters, adapting its strategies based on the behavior of its enemies. It wasn't just a tool, it was a hunter, evolving with each engagement, becoming more efficient, more deadly. The commander watched in silence as the drone eliminated a series of targets in quick succession, its movements precise and calculated. There was no hesitation, no mercy. The alien commander felt a cold realization settling in. The humans were not just training soldiers. They were training machines, teaching them to think and act like predators. This was the future of war, one where the line between human and machine blurred. The humans had created something that could fight their battles for them, something that could continue the fight even after they were gone. It was an unsettling thought, one that lingered in the commander's mind as the drone returned to its docking station, silent and efficient. The final demonstration was a tactical briefing, where human officers discussed potential scenarios involving interstellar conflicts. The commander listened carefully as they analyzed possible alien threats, including their own species. The level of detail was staggering. The humans had thought of everything: logistics, supply lines, weaknesses in enemy morale, and even environmental factors that could be exploited. Nothing was left to chance. They had war-gamed every possible outcome, prepared for every contingency. The alien realized, with a growing sense of dread, that humans didn't just prepare for victory, they prepared to ensure that no enemy could ever challenge them again. It wasn't just about survival, it was about dominance, about securing their place in the galaxy by any means necessary. The humans had learned from their history, from their countless wars, that the only way to ensure peace was to be so terrifying, so efficient in battle, that no one would dare oppose them. The commander's mind raced as they left the facility. Humanity was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. It wasn't just their technology, their weapons, or their tactics, it was their mindset. They had embraced war, not as a last resort, but as a necessary part of their existence. And they had perfected it. The alien couldn't shake the feeling that humanity's rise would change everything. They weren't just another species, they were something far more terrifying, something the galaxy might not be ready for. And the commander knew, deep down, that once humanity set its sights on the stars, nothing would ever be the same again. The alien commander entered what appeared to be a more secluded, heavily secured area of the academy, accompanied by high-ranking human officials. This was a part of the tour that had not been discussed beforehand. The commander could sense that whatever lay ahead would reveal the full depth of humanity's military philosophy. There was an undeniable tension, as though the very walls held the weight of untold stories. They were led into a room that felt different from the rest of the academy, darker, more ominous. A large screen flickered to life as the human general standing beside the commander explained what they were about to see. The footage wasn't of typical training exercises or weapon demonstrations. It was combat footage, but not from virtual simulations or historical archives. It was real, raw, and unfiltered. The commander watched in silence as the screen displayed human soldiers in the midst of battle, not against aliens, but against other humans. The brutality was shocking. Soldiers fought with a ferocity that defied logic, their bodies covered in dirt and blood, pushing through injury and exhaustion as though pain was nothing but an afterthought. The camera didn't flinch, showing the reality of what it meant to be a human soldier in the heat of war. The level of destruction, the willingness to press forward at all costs, was unlike anything the commander had ever seen. As the footage continued, the human general began to speak about the philosophy that guided their soldiers. They didn't just train for physical endurance or tactical superiority. They trained their minds to accept the inevitability of conflict. They were conditioned, from a young age, to see war as an intrinsic part of their existence. It was not something to be feared or avoided, but embraced. The commander had seen species that fought out of desperation or survival, but never like this. Humans fought because it was ingrained in their very culture. What shocked the alien most was how the humans dealt with loss. The footage showed soldiers pressing on even when they had clearly lost friends, comrades, even entire squads. There was no breakdown, no collapse into grief. Instead, it seemed to fuel them. The pain of loss was not a deterrent, it was a driving force. The general explained that this was by design. Human soldiers were taught to use their emotions, not suppress them, turning sorrow, anger, and fear into weapons. The commander couldn't help but feel a shiver run through them as the screen continued to show images of human warriors enduring things that would have broken most other species. There was something unsettling in how they could compartmentalize, move forward, and continue the mission without hesitation, no matter what was thrown at them. The general's tone grew quieter as he discussed the final layer of their training, the conditioning of the mind. Humanity had long recognized that war was not won through strength or technology alone. The true battlefield was in the mind. They had developed programs designed to break down a soldier's psyche, only to rebuild it into something stronger, something unbreakable. The commander listened as the general described how these soldiers were put through simulated failures, traumatic losses, and seemingly unwinnable situations to teach them one thing: there was always a way forward. The room fell silent as the footage ended. The commander felt a heavy weight pressing on them, realizing that humans weren't just survivors. They were conquerors, shaped by a history of internal conflict and external threats. Their willingness to sacrifice, to push beyond the limits of physical and mental endurance, was what made them dangerous. The commander understood now that this was not a species that could be easily broken. They would fight, adapt, and evolve, no matter the cost. As they left the viewing room, the alien commander's mind was racing. They had seen many things in their lifetime, but this was something different. Humanity had unlocked a level of warfare that went beyond tactics and strategy. They had weaponized their own willpower. Their ability to endure suffering, to compartmentalize grief and pain, and turn it into fuel for their fight was not just terrifying, it was unprecedented. The general led the alien to a final briefing room, where the highest-ranking officials of the academy gathered. What followed was a detailed discussion about humanity's future on the galactic stage. They spoke openly about the conflicts that lay ahead, the threats from other species, and their preparations for those inevitable wars. What struck the commander was how calm, almost matter-of-fact, the humans were about it. They didn't see these upcoming wars as something to be feared. They saw them as opportunities. Opportunities to prove themselves, to rise even higher in the ranks of the Galactic Order. The commander listened in stunned silence as the humans laid out plans for expanding their military presence in space, for developing even more advanced weaponry, and for ensuring that no species, no matter how advanced, could ever threaten them. This wasn't just about defense. It was about dominance. Humanity wasn't content with merely surviving in the galaxy. They were preparing to make sure they thrived, no matter who stood in their way. As the briefing concluded, the alien commander realized the full scope of what they had witnessed. The humans weren't just preparing for potential conflict. They were preparing for a future where conflict was inevitable, where they would emerge not just as participants, but as victors. They were willing to do whatever it took to ensure that outcome, no matter the cost, no matter the sacrifice. The commander left the academy with a sense of unease that had not been present when they arrived. They had come expecting to see a young, inexperienced species still finding its way in the galaxy. What they had found was something far more dangerous. Humans were not just capable of war, they had mastered it. They had embraced it as a part of who they were, and they had built an entire culture around ensuring their survival and dominance in a universe that was not kind to the weak. As the alien commander's ship lifted off from the academy grounds, they couldn't shake the feeling that humanity's rise was inevitable. They had seen the future, and it was filled with conflict. And at the center of it all stood humanity, ready to face whatever came next with a terrifying, unyielding resolve. The galaxy was not prepared for what was coming, and the commander knew it. As the stars stretched out before them, they realized that this encounter had changed everything. The humans were no longer an unknown variable. They were a force to be reckoned with, and soon, the entire galaxy would know it.